Picture this: two men standing on opposite ends of a battlefield they helped create. The Who, one of the most electrifying rebellious rock bands in history, was built on their chemistry, but behind the soaring vocals and the windmill guitar riffs, Roger Daltrey and Pete Townshend were never truly allies. Their partnership was a war zone, a volatile mix of ambition, resentment, and unspoken betrayals that festered over decades. For years, Townshend had played the role of the tortured genius, the songwriter who poured his soul into every note. Daltrey, the golden-hailed frontman, the warrior voice of The Who, was the face of the band. But behind the power chords and the iconic screams, there was tension, a silent battle for control that fans never truly saw. Now Townshend finally breaks his silence, revealing the side of Daltrey that had remained hidden for years. The arrogance, the temper, the betrayals, and the countless feuds that threatened to tear The Who apart. But Daltrey's battles weren't just within the band. His list of enemies stretched far beyond The Who's chaotic legacy. From the very beginning, Daltrey and Townshend clashed like fire and gasoline. Pete was the visionary, the mastermind behind the band's music, crafting intricate rock operas that defined a generation. Daltrey was the fighter, the brute force that brought those songs to life, but also the man who resented being reduced to just the voice. They weren't just different. They despised each other's methods. Townshend, the intellectual, obsessed over every note, every lyric, every concept album. Daltrey, raw and instinctive, thought less, acted more. He didn't care about deep concepts or abstract storytelling. He wanted to be a rock god, the ultimate frontman. Their clashes became legendary. In 1973, during the making of Quadrophenia, the tension boiled over into a violent explosion. Townshend, frustrated by Daltrey's criticism, lashed out, swinging his guitar at him in a blind rage. Daltrey, never one to back down, knocked Townshend out cold with a single punch. It wasn't just a moment of anger. It was years of suppressed fury unleashed in one devastating blow, and the battle never truly ended. Daltrey never saw himself as just a singer. He wanted to lead. He wanted control, not just over the band, but over The Who's entire legacy. Think of the countless times he overruled Townshend, the moments he claimed authority over the band's direction, the way he belittled Pete's artistic vision. Even as Townshend struggled with his own demons, alcohol, self-doubt, the burden of carrying The Who's creative weight, Daltrey remained unrelenting. He saw himself as the band's savior, the one who had to keep The Who from self-destruction, but in reality, he was part of the very thing that was ripping them apart. When The Who attempted to reunite in later years, Daltrey pushed for a return to their hard rock roots, dismissing Townshend's desire to explore new musical territory. Their reunion wasn't a revival. It was another war. And Townshend? He had enough. For Roger Daltrey, conflict wasn't just a part of life, it was a defining trait. His fiery temper, his uncompromising attitude, and his deep-rooted sense of pride made him both a formidable frontman and a nightmare to work with. While his voice electrified stadiums and defined a generation, his reputation for hostility left a trail of shattered relationships and bitter grudges. It started within his own band. Daltrey's earliest and most infamous feud was with Keith Moon, The Who's unpredictable and self-destructive drummer. Picture the chaos. A band room filled with smoke, the scent of alcohol thick in the air, and Moon, wild-eyed, laughing, reckless, handing out pills like they were candy. Daltrey had always seen himself as the band's enforcer, the one who had to keep things under control. But Moon's behavior was the kind of madness that couldn't be tamed. When Daltrey caught him distributing drugs to the other band members, he snapped. A violent confrontation erupted, and before anyone could intervene, Daltrey had launched at Moon, fists flying, rage boiling over. The Who had been on the edge of implosion before, but this was different. The band had no choice. They fired Daltrey, albeit temporarily. It was a moment that could have ended his career, but instead, it set the stage for a decades-long cycle of feuds, fights, and fractured relationships. Daltrey's fights weren't just personal. They were about dominance, about proving he belonged at the top. When Led Zeppelin began their meteoric rise, Daltrey saw them as a threat. Sloppy, he scoffed about Jimmy Page guitar work. It was a jab that ignited one of the great unspoken rivalries of rock. Page, never one to back down, fired back with his own barbs. To him, the Who were dinosaurs, clinging to their past, unable to evolve with the changing landscape of rock. As Zeppelin became the biggest band in the world, Daltrey fumed, watching them claim the kind of success he had always chased. The insults continued for years, their disdain for each other simmering beneath the surface, exploding in offhand remarks and dismissive interviews. Two legends, two egos, two men who refused to acknowledge the other's greatness. Then there was Gene Simmons. If there was ever an artist who embodied everything Daltrey hated, it was the Kiss bassist. Daltrey was a rock purist. Music first, money second. Simmons? He was a businessman first, a musician second. He turned Kiss into a money-making machine, branding everything from coffins to action figures, and Daltrey loathed him for it. Their feud wasn't just personal, it was ideological. Daltrey saw Simmons as a sellout, a man who had gutted rock for profit. Simmons, always unapologetic, mocked Daltrey in return, seeing him as outdated, bitter, and unwilling to adapt to the reality of the music industry. For decades they clashed in interviews, their rivalry playing out in biting remarks and thinly veiled insults. But while Simmons laughed his way to the bank, Daltrey seethed, watching rock morph into something he no longer recognized. But perhaps Daltrey's most bizarre and unexpected rivalry was with Liam Gallagher. The 1919s were a new era. The Who were icons of the past, while Oasis was the face of British rock's new generation, and Gallagher, cocky, brash, and utterly shameless, had no respect for the old guard. He dismissed Daltrey as a relic, a man whose time had long passed. The sneering insults came fast and ruthless, scoffing at their place in rock history. And Daltrey? He fired back with equal venom. He saw Gallagher as an arrogant punk, a kid who had no idea what it took to build a legacy. It was the old lion versus the young cub, except neither was willing to back down. Their feud became a generational battle, rock's past standing defiant against rock's present. Daltrey was furious at being discarded, dismissed, seen as old news. Gallagher reveled in the fight, never missing a chance to twist. Even as time passed, their mutual disdain remained. Their feud, like so many in Daltrey's life, was not just about words. It was about respect, about recognition, about a man who refused to be forgotten. Daltrey had a history of business disputes, legal battles, and power struggles. At times he fought with the Who's management over money and contracts, battling for control over the band's future. He even went head-to-head with record labels, demanding more power over their releases. He had spent his entire life fighting for something. But at what cost? Now, as Pete Townshend speaks out, the carefully crafted image of Roger Daltrey, the fearless frontman, the indestructible force behind the Who, begins to crack. For decades, fans saw him as the ultimate rock rebel, the voice that gave the Who its raw, untamed energy. But behind the legend was a man at war, not just with the industry, not just with his bandmates, but with himself. Daltrey's life in rock wasn't just about glory, anthems, and sold-out stadiums. It was riddled with explosive battles, deep-seated grudges, and relationships left in ruins. His clashes with Townshend, his physical fight with Keith Moon, his barbed exchanges with Jimmy Page, his disdain for Gene Simmons, his fiery words against Liam Gallagher, these weren't just isolated feuds. They were part of a pattern, a constant power struggle that defined his career as much as his music did. With Townshend, the tension never faded. Their partnership produced some of rock's most powerful anthems, but it was built on mutual resentment, creative control struggles, and personal betrayals that simmered beneath the surface for decades. His violent altercation with Moon in 1965 nearly tore the band apart before it had fully risen to fame, and his ongoing rivalries with Page, Simmons, and Gallagher revealed a man who refused to accept change, new faces, or competition. And now, as Townshend pulls back the curtain on years of hidden animosity, one question lingers. Was Daltrey truly the Who's driving force, or the man who nearly tore it all apart? His legacy isn't just one of music, it's one of endless conflict, of dominance won and lost, of friendships turned to dust. And in the end, the greatest battle he fought wasn't with his bandmates, the industry, or his rivals. It was the battle within himself.